Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, today we're going to talk about a really critical leadership core competency. That competency is empathy. Begin by talking about what it is, some of the benefits, and how to develop it. So let's get going. Empathy, as I've said, a critical leadership core competency. Enhances trust, enhances communication, and seeks to help optimize team performance. What do? The empathetic leader develops a sharing of feelings of others, understanding them, creating a supportive and inclusive environment. They foster collaboration, which leads to fostering of innovation. It's particularly important quality in today's diverse and dynamic workplace. Okay, quick definition. Some of the benefits, just a few. There are many. I'm only going to mention a few. 1, enhanced trust. Spoken about this many times. It's just so critical and so important. The empathetic leader enhances trust. Trust, as we all know, is based upon trustworthy behavior. All right. Empathy, though, helps the leaders to build that trustworthy behavior by demonstrating genuine care and genuine understanding. Improved communications, mentioned that in the intro as well. Leaders who can empathize with their team can better communicate and tailor their message to resonate with the audience's needs and emotions. So, you need to know who you're speaking to, but in being empathetic, you are going to be able to optimize better that communication with those that you serve. Stronger relationships, for sure. Empathy fosters personal connections between the leaders and, again, those they serve, their team, their constituents, whomever, which leads to a more positive and collaborative work environment. This is a goal of leaders, a more collaborative work environment. Okay, so there are just a couple of benefits, and as I've indicated, certainly there are many more. So how do we go about developing this empathy in our leadership practice? How do we develop this critical leadership core competency? Well, to begin with, let's talk about that communication component. And I want to specifically highlight active listening. Pay attention to those you serve, to those on your team. Again, your constituents. Try to understand their feelings. Really try to get them. Seeking to understand. So again, challenge your own assumptions. Perhaps your own biases. We all have those. Challenge them. Try to see situations from the other person's point of view. This is really important in leadership overall, but clearly a key way to develop your empathetic leadership. Show compassion. Demonstrate genuine care for those you serve, for their well-being. Offer support when they need it. And we know everyone needs support from time to time. Be vulnerable. Now this is really important. I want to make sure you get this, because vulnerability is not a weakness for a leader. It is a strength. The empathetic leader demonstrates this by sharing their experiences, their emotions, which in turn creates this, in quotes here, safe space for those you serve to be vulnerable as well. We all benefit from that. And this last notion I'll mention, cognitive empathy. Practice this. Try to understand the thought processes and the perspective of others, even and perhaps particularly when their thoughts and feelings are not aligned with yours. They're different from yours. That's particularly valuable for the empathetic leader. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we're talking about, some of the benefits, and how you could begin to develop this critical leadership core competency. Okay, so now I want to talk about a book, a source. And the source is Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's a historian and an author. She emphasizes empathy in the leadership and moral decision-making in her writing. She talks about previous presidents and particularly focuses on leadership core competency, of which empathy jumps out at you reading Doris's books. She says that this is a critical trait possessed by effective leaders throughout history, alongside qualities like humility and resilience. So here we go. Here's the book, 2018. The title, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Well, you can see why I'm offering this to each of you. We're definitely in turbulent times. No question about that. So this book is particularly, even though it's a couple years old now, particularly valuable and on point. Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I recommend it to everyone. She talks about a lot of things, and certainly leadership is the topic of the book. But she talks about Abraham Lincoln, who is a transformational leader. She talks about Theodore Roosevelt, a crisis leader. She talks about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the turnaround leader. And lastly, she talks about Lyndon Baines Johnson, a visionary leader. So different times in history, different times in our historical lives, different needs, different competencies, but each and every one of these people benefit from being an empathetic leader. So Goodwin's analysis of historical leaders highlights that. The ability to, as she says, quote, feel your pain, end quote. A characteristic often associated with effective and respected leaders. She suggests that leaders who demonstrate empathy can build stronger connections with their constituents and make more informed decisions. Certainly a goal for all leaders, informed decision making. She also stresses empathy in moral decision making. The role of moral decision making is critical for a leader. She suggests that the capacity to understand and share the feelings of others is a critical factor in making ethical choices. So, empathy is an important component demonstrated by leaders in their interactions with others, right? How they conduct themselves. And each of the people that I've mentioned has shown their own capacity to do this in their own presidency. So now I'm going to move on to what is today President Donald Trump's 100th day in office for his second term. Well, in the context of empathy and an empathetic leader, let's look at how this is going for now President Trump. Just a couple of data points to start. Here we go. His first 100 days. This is from an article in the New York Times by Irina Cabaneros and Adish Bhatia, dated April 29th, 2025. Okay, his first 100 days. President Trump has issued more executive orders than any modern president. Now keep in mind that an executive order does not bear the weight of law. That's Congress's function. Nor does it bear the weight of the purse. Again, Congress's function, the power of the purse. But nonetheless, President Trump has largely bypassed that to issue the greatest number of executive orders of any modern president since taking office. Okay, well, what's been the result? Talk about that quickly. So far, in his first 100 days in office, President Trump has been sued in federal courts more than any other president in modern times. It is interesting to note that number 2 on that list, the second most sued president in modern times, is President Trump in his first term. So there is a fair amount of objection, in fact, lawsuits brought in his first 100 days against him. Economics, one of the key things that he ran on. Should talk about that. What about the dollar, the value, the worth of the U.S. dollar? Well, the U.S. dollar in Trump's first 100 days has plunged, fallen sharply. So when you look at charts of this, there are people where the value went up. Certainly in Reagan, Clinton, Biden, the value went up. Under Trump, it has been a rocky road, to say the least, but a substantial reduction in the value of the U.S. dollar in his first 100 days. Well, next step then would be say, what about the stock market? Well, the markets have fallen as well. Again, across the board. In Trump's first 100 days, the negative return in the stock market has been noteworthy and significant losses. Trillions of dollars in market value have been lost. Where are we in the global scene? Well, we're used to getting these daily briefings. Briefings from various departments. What about the State Department? Let's look at that one. The State Department press briefings are at an all-time low. All-time low. In the first 100 days, there's been less than 25. Biden's first 100 days in 2021 is an example, greater than 75. What about working for people, the American people, for the people of the world? Federal funding for medical research has been stymied. The National Institutes of Health funding for competitive grants is being slashed significantly, regularly. National Institutes of Health funds more medical research than any organization in the world and has tended to provide huge returns in economic innovation and improved health. But the Trump administration has made big cuts, as I've stated. So what he is doing is aligning his decision-making with his political priorities, excluding things like terminating studies on care for transgender people, cuts to studies on racial disparities in medical care, elimination of some categories of vaccine research. So These cuts have also gone to academic institutions, including major funding freezes on grants to Columbia and Harvard universities. Well, what happens then to the leader's popularity? Well, Trump went from being popular, he was elected, right? 49% of the vote, to now being noteworthily unpopular. Okay, so why do we mention these things? Why do we bring these things up? Well, because the leader needs to lead. What does the leader need to do to lead? Well, the case that I am making today is for him to alter course, to be more effective, to be more collaborative, to be more innovative, to work with others, not at the expense of others, to be a more empathetic leadership, to be factual, to be accurate, to be trustworthy, to earn the trustworthiness of others by being honest. So now what we have is the opportunity to make a course correction, to alter course. This critical leadership core competency, empathy, I believe, can be one of the ways to make that happen. To care for others, to show compassion to others, to be vulnerable to others by sharing your own vulnerabilities and then creating that safe space for others to be vulnerable as well. Each of these things really is quite a positive in the life and practice of a leader, particularly the leader of the United States. Because those actions can affect the lives of others, could affect the lives of prisoners in San Salvador, who without due process are in one of the most egregious prisons in the world. President Trump said yesterday, yeah, I could make a call, but I'm not going to. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said that he is required to, quote, facilitate getting him back. The act of caring for others, compassion for others, of listening to others, doesn't mean that they are right, doesn't mean that we accept their conduct or behavior, but they get an opportunity to display who they are, who they really are. And if they are criminal, then they should be accountable. But if they are not, and we just don't like them, well, that's a very different matter. And a matter for an empathetic leader to think long and hard about, because that is not effective leadership. An empathetic leader is a much, much more effective leader. Okay, empathy, folks, a critical leadership core competency, a critical leadership competency for us all to incorporate in our practice, to share with those that we are in the service of leading. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please tell your friends. I'm so grateful. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.